In this video, I'm going to be walking you through an easy way to create beautiful shaker-style cabinet doors like you see here. The most basic style of shaker door is a 5-piece door. It consists of a panel, 2 rails, which are the horizontal pieces, and 2 stiles, which are the vertical pieces. As you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, a shaker-style door can consist of more rails. It can also consist of more stiles. It can consist of multiple panels. However, this is the most basic style that you're going to see. The shaker style door is also commonly referred to as what's called a cope and stick door. And all that means is cope and stick is going to have 90-degree butt joints, whether it's through dominoes, whether it's just through glue, dowels, tongue and groove router bit sets, which is what I'm going to show you here today, but the joints all come together via butt joint. Other option would be a mitered door, and the only difference between this door and that is that they would come together in the corners as a miter. As I stated before, I'm going to be showing you how to do this on a router table, and what I'm going to be using is a tongue and groove router bit set that is specifically for this application. The first thing I want to highlight on the bit set that you use, this is a Freud router bit set. This is adjustable. That's the key term there, adjustable. There are plenty of options on the market that are not adjustable but do come in different profiles. The profile that we're going to use is just the standard tongue and groove. Now, while non-adjustable router bit sets are very good, this is from Bits Bits. This is a white sides router bit set. The issue is that it is not adjustable. And so here's the problem that comes into play when we are building shaker style doors. And that is the panel thickness can vary depending on the material you're using. I think by now everybody knows that when you see something that says 3/4 inch plywood or 1/4 inch plywood, it is in fact not 3/4 or half or 1/4 inch. Those are just the imperial equivalents that have been labeled here in the US. In reality, they're all measured in millimeters. Now, with that being said, in this video, you will hear me using metric. Doesn't mean you can't do this exact same thing in imperial. I just use the metric system when I'm building things because that's what is easiest for me. Let me give you a quick example of what it is that I'm talking about. If I'm to measure this panel comes in at 4.95 millimeters, we'll say. If I go here to this non-adjustable router bit set that just has the single cutter and measure, we're at 5.38 millimeters. So the panel will absolutely fit in your rails and stiles, absolutely. But there's going to be a little bit of play. So having an adjustable router bit set can really let you dial in and have a really nice tight fit. Now, whenever you're using one of these that is adjustable, you have to make sure that you're using the opposing cutter in the same fashion because you want everything to line up appropriately. Now, how are they adjustable? On adjustable router bit sets, you'll see on top they have a bunch of washers, and those washers are different thicknesses. So by stacking washers or utilizing different combinations of washers, you're able to get a perfect fit. Now, that's incredibly important because I may have bought this panel for one project that is 5 millimeters thick, and I'd buy a different panel for a different project and it's 6 or 7 millimeters thick. That's where having the adjustability is going to be the biggest benefit. Now, personally, I always like to start this by cutting the groove, and there's a couple of different reasons why, and I'll show you one of the most important ones once we get over to the router table. But here you can see I have my 5 pieces. I have my panel, I have my 2 rails, and my 2 stiles. But what you'll notice is I also have a couple of offcuts from the exact same material because it is exactly the same thickness. This is very important because not only can I now make a setup block essentially for future projects as long as I'm using the same thickness material, but it also allows me to get everything dialed in before I go through the repetitive process of doing it on multiple pieces. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time up front making sure that everything fits exactly the way that it should. Now, the first thing that I'm going to check is what the thickness of my material is, because since I'm doing the groove first, I need to make sure that that groove is exactly in the middle of that rail or stile. So this is exactly 20 millimeters thick. Now, I already know that my panel is just under 5, so we're just going to use 5 as the number. So that leaves us with 15 millimeters of material. We split that in half, and that's 7.5. Now, before going over and setting up the router table, the next thing I'm going to check and adjust, if necessary, is the router bit. And here I'm at 5.04. So this is going to be a really close fit to the panel that I already have. Now, one of the other reasons why I always like to do the groove first is because it actually gives me an opportunity to test fit and make any adjustments I need to before moving on. Now, this is where setup blocks come in incredibly handy. This is a metric version. It's an inexpensive version, eye gauging. You can find them on Amazon. I know I need 7.5. Well, as you'll see, this piece right here is 6.5. And if we pair that with the 1, we now have 7.5. So now how do I use these to set the router bit? Well, because we are using setup blocks, this part is incredibly easy because all we need to do is bring our cutter heads down to the top so they're touching my spacer blocks. Now what I'm looking for is just a little bit of drag. So you can see right there, now I know that I am exactly 7.5 millimeters from the surface to the bottom of the cutter head. So the next thing that I can do is I can just take my little piece that I made a mark on, make sure that it lines up, and from here, we just have to make sure that we get the bearing in line with the fence. Now this next part is very simple. This has a bearing. Now we want to make sure that that bearing is in perfect alignment with the fence. And so how we can do that is we can just use a straight edge, and I like to come out just a little bit, and then I'll push it back until I am exactly even with that bearing. Thank you to Woodworkers Guild of America for sponsoring today's video. Whether you're looking for information on furniture building, want to learn more about hand tools, or need to learn about cabinetry, Woodworkers Guild of America is your online resource for woodworking instructions, ideas, and information. Woodworkers Guild of America is always creating new premium videos to keep you coming back for more and to help you stay inspired. And this is accomplished through instructional videos taught by talented and friendly experts. The professional instructors walk you through each technique with step-by-step demonstrations, providing their expert tips and tricks. I myself plan to use it to learn more about finishing and dovetail joinery techniques. Now, the first 1,000 subscribers that click on the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to the Woodworkers Guild of America for only $1.49. As a member, you'll have access to Woodworkers Guild of America's live streaming tutorials and Q&As where their expert instructors share tips, answer questions, and engage with the Woodworkers Guild of America community in real time. Experience the satisfaction and joy of creating something truly one of a kind with your own two hands. If this sounds like something that you can benefit from, be sure to click the link in the video description. I hope to see you there. Now from here, turn on the router table, push this through, make the cut, and we'll do a quick test fit. Now before I do my test fit, I'm just going to do a quick check. So we've got 6.95, we've got 7.35. So that means, so it came off just like this, so it fits on there perfectly. We're still a little bit high to truly get this thing centered. So because we have the test piece, what I can do, lower this bit down just ever so slightly, flip this over, make the test cut on the other side, and I think we'll be able to get just a little bit closer, and that'll just make the assembly a lot easier. So now we'll check this real fast, and we're at 7.2. 7.04. So we're a little bit closer. I could probably adjust it just a little bit more, but this is well within tolerances. So now we're going to do the test fit. Now what I'm looking for when I slide this on is, one, I want to have a little bit of drag because that tells me that it's really nice and close. But if I can put a little bit of pressure and it doesn't just want to fall off, then that's a really good sign. I'm also looking for very, very minimal gap, if any, once it's in the panel, just because it'll stop it from making, noises and stuff when you're opening and closing the cabinet door. You just want it to be tighter. Now, if you ended up going way too thick, they do sell these little black spacer balls that you can actually slide in there, and it'll make your panel super tight, and you put them in on the back side. But if you don't need to use those, don't use them. And adjustable router bit sets will really, really give you that ability. And since we have it set up exactly where we want it, this is when we're going to make all of the cuts. ready to go. I like to lay them back out on the table in the configuration that they will be when the door is actually constructed, in a way that I always remind myself, or basically to help make sure that I'm referencing the same face, and that'll make sense here in a little bit because it's not perfectly centered in the board, but again, it's so minuscule that it doesn't really matter, and I'll show you why. I like to mark these with a S for a style and underline it so I know in what orientation, because that tells me what face needs to be cut. And if it's a rail, I do it like this. So when I go over to the router table, I can lay all my pieces out exactly how I want them to be cut. So I know, for example, this one's the bottom, but it's cut in the top, where that's the top and it's cut in the bottom. So put these back together, make sure everything lines up the way that it should. We already know that the panel fits nicely and snug. So now the next step is that we need to get the rails to go into that slot that we cut on the stiles. How do we do that? We do it with the second bit. So this one I'm actually going to show you in a little bit more detail on how to set it up and make sure that it's the exact same spacing as your first cut. What I want to do here is make sure that there are no spacers that are in between the cutter heads that are going to cause that cutter to be different from the cutter we just used. Now, before I was mentioning this screw just comes off. This just gives you a better visual. This right here is a whole series of different washers. Now I know that there should be a washer under here because there was from the last time I used this router bit set, and there it is. If I was to make this cut now, the tenon would be thicker than what we had just cut, so it wouldn't fit. Now at this point, what I like to do is take my piece and I want to see if that cutter is where it needs to be. Looking at it from here, that gap is going to be the gap that I need, but again, we're always going to start on a test piece and we're going to make sure that we have the correct measurements, and if we don't, we can always make adjustments, but that's lined up pretty much perfect. So we're going to go ahead and proceed with this. Same thing here in terms of getting this set to the bearing. The only difference is the bearing is actually in between the cutter heads as opposed to the top. So you just want to make sure that you line that up, adjust as needed. Now I'm going to be using a miter gauge to do my tenons here. They do make coping sleds that you can get, but I don't really need that so much in this scenario. So what I'm going to do, this is the piece that I'm going to cut. This is my other scrap piece that I'm doing just to get everything set up. This is my original test piece. I'm just using this behind it as a sacrificial board because it doesn't really matter if I cut into there for this. The purpose of using the sacrificial board, for those of you that don't know, is that when I make my cut, it's going to have a tendency to have a bunch of blowout on this part here, especially on white oak. So having an auxiliary piece here will actually support the wood fibers when I push this through, so it won't actually do that. So we'll do a quick test on our test pieces, and well, pretty much perfect. Now, something I wanted to mention earlier, the reason why I was concerned about trying to get everything as close to center as possible is that it wouldn't matter if you mix up your pieces when you go to put it together, it should still be fairly flush, and if it's not, it's such a minimal amount, it's not going to change the construction of the door. So sometimes things happen, things get mixed up, but this is exactly what we are looking for. You'll notice that there's like the slightest little bit of space in there, and that's going to be perfect for the glue, but I could not be happier with how this came out. So now I can do the other two rails, and then we can get going on assembling the door and cutting the panel. This next part is the part that always gets super confusing to people, trips people up. It's really not super difficult, and I will try to explain it in the easiest possible way that I can to help you guys figure out how to get the accurate and proper panel size. So there's a few things that we need to understand prior to doing the panel. As you can see, this is an oversized panel. It is not cut to the final length. I did that just so I could talk about this part. But when it comes to the width is easy. So first of all, whatever you want the width of your cabinet door to be, you need to make sure that you account for the tenons that are going to be cut that actually go into the grooves. Now, on this particular router bit set, I know that it's roughly 11 millimeters. So that means that I would need to account for that additional 22 millimeters in length for this bottom piece to get my final achieved width, because this goes into there, so I'm losing that 11 and I'm losing this 11 millimeters. Hopefully that makes sense, okay? But when it comes to getting the proper measurement, we know that the width is going to be from the tenon to the other tenon, or the tongue. And in this case, it is 350 millimeters wide. So I know that the width of my panel needs to be 350. This is the part that really confuses people. So my length is 768 millimeters. Now I chose that on purpose. So this is 768 millimeter tall door. My rails and stiles are 50 millimeters in width. So if I take 768 minus the 50 plus 50, that gives me 668. So that means that from this point to this point, it's 668 millimeters. However, we need to go the depth of the groove. And before I said it's roughly 11 millimeters, I can just put this in there real quick. I could verify that it is in fact 11 millimeters. So that means 11 here, 11 there, that's 22. So 668 plus 22 is 690. So I hope that that is an easy way for you to understand width of the rails. Stile length is the total length minus the rail width for both, and then adding the depth of the groove. So we need a panel that's 350 by 690. Now, one thing that I will point out is that I will always subtract about 1 millimeter off of that just to make sure that everything fits just right and doesn't push out on the joints at all. So for this, I'm going to do just that. Do a quick test fit just to make sure everything is what it needs to be. Oh. Now that is a nice fit. Now, once I get everything together, all I'm looking for is that I don't have any protrusion at the top and bottom once it is together, because that would tell me that maybe the panel is just a little bit too large and it's causing it to push. But right now, I mean, this is a great fit and a great finished door. So now all that needs to happen is it just needs to be glued up and clamped and allow it to dry. This part itself is pretty straightforward. The only place that I really typically apply glue to is the tongue, the tenon here. I'll put a little bit on the ends. Don't need a lot. And the type of glue that I use usually is dictated by what the material is. However, I now find myself using Titebond Quick and Thick pretty much any opportunity I get, just because of how quickly it cures and the fact that it dries clear, which is nice. I am often asked if why don't I apply glue to the groove. You can. If you're going to do that, I just like to apply, like, I don't know, one bead, every third. And all that's going to do is it's going to help keep that panel in place and not shift around if you do have a little bit of extra space on the sides. From here, you just got to put it back together. Make sure everything lines up one last time before getting it in the clamps. One tip that I like that I don't see a lot of people doing is I actually prefer it right at this point. Once I've gotten this bottom part nice and flush, I like to clamp that end because you're going to have to do it to the top as well. And now we'll have a base point that isn't going to shift as I adjust the other end of the door. So just makes aligning both ends and ensuring that they stay nice and even pretty simple. If I have to manipulate anything, I'll usually just take my rubber mallet and adjust as needed. And that was the example of what I was talking about. Had I not clamped up the other end, as you start to move those, it'll throw out the other end as well. Now I'll let this sit in the clamps for about an hour, just because of the glue that I used. If that, come out, take it out, give it a quick sand, and we'll check the finished product. Been plenty of time in the clamps. Pull this off. And now from here, I'll just do a quick finish sand and we'll see how it looks. One other thing that I like to do with my doors is instead of having this really sharp edge, you can use a very tiny round over or something like that. But if I wanted to kind of keep that square look, I'll just take a sanding block and just soften up the edges. And I use this one for the outsides. Just a couple of passes so it's not so sharp, again, especially with white oak. And then for the insides, I'll use something like this that I can actually get right on that edge. And I'm just breaking up that inside edge just enough to where it's not too sharp. And just like that, a perfectly crafted shaker style cabinet door. It gives you great results every single time if you just spend a little bit of time getting everything set up. So if you've never done a shaker style door with a router table and a router bit set, give it a try on your next project. Thanks for watching.